All right, what's up, everybody? Check this out. I don't know if you know this or not, but there's an epidemic. If you've been following me, you know there is. And it's not COVID, it's tethers. This particular individual, I call him the West Coast version of Dr. Derek Colon. His name is Jonathan Cavillo, assistant professor of sociology of religion, Boston University School of Theology. And what's interesting about Jonathan and Derek Colon is that they're both Latino, they're both Christians, and they're both doctors. You know, the similarities are amazing. And they're both on a mission to suggest that Latinos are a part of the creation of hip hop. All right. So one of my subs sent me a video of Dr. Cavillo being interviewed, and he talked about a number of things, but I'm going to go to the part where he talks about hip hop and the Latino influence in hip hop.
That's one project, the follow up to the book. So I'm working through that right now. So be on the lookout for that. I don't have a name for it yet, but it's in the works. And then I've got another project that relates to that as well, and it relates to a specific arena of cultural production, namely hip hop culture. And so I'm looking at how hip hop culture in the greater LA area was produced in such a way that allowed space for Latinos to be a part of that process. Now, this, of course, is a cultural movement primarily spearheaded by Black artists and largely connected to Afro-diasporic cultures going back for generations. So hip hop is an expression of an ongoing confluence of Afro-diasporic cultures, and yet Latinos enter into the picture. Of course, outside of my research, well, I wouldn't say outside. I mean, I'm doing some research on what others have done already, like in New York City, for example. But what I'm looking at is on the West Coast, and the original research I'm doing is more focused on the West Coast and how Latinos on the West Coast began to engage and participate and co-create within the hip hop space.
What you talking about, Luke?
Arena of cultural production, namely hip hop culture. And so I'm looking at how hip hop culture in the greater LA area was produced in such a way that allowed space for Latinos to be a part of that process. Now, this, of course, is a cultural movement primarily spearheaded by Black artists and largely connected to Afro-diasporic cultures going back for generations. So hip hop is an expression of an ongoing confluence of Afro-diasporic cultures, and yet Latinos enter into the picture. Of course, outside of my research, well, I wouldn't say outside. I mean, I'm doing some research on what others have done already, like in New York City, for example. But what I'm looking at is on the West Coast, and the original research I'm doing is more focused on the West Coast and how Latinos on the West Coast began to engage and participate and co-create within the hip hop space. And again, as I said, a predominantly Black African American space. And so you have Latinos, not only you have some that were, classified as perhaps mestizos or from a variety of different regions, because LA we think of as predominantly Chicano oftentimes, but in my research, I'm finding, Central Americans, Nicaraguenses, Guatemalans, Salvadorans that are a part of this scene as well early on. And so part of my project is looking at the scene early on.
Doesn't that sound like Cologne talking about foundation early on? Let's go.
Because one of the arguments I'm making is that there was sort of this cultural moment at the early foundational period of West Coast hip hop. So when hip hop starts to emerge as an identifiable movement from East Coast, transplanted onto the West Coast, and adapted to the West Coast culture, built upon foundational movements already existing on the West Coast. You have Latinos early.
Now you see he's building an argument for a co-creation. He's saying there was already things going on. And hip hop from the East Coast built on that. So this is how he's going to crowbar Latinos from the West Coast into West Coast hip hop. Now, Big Brown Daddy, he's going to expand or expound on what Cavillo is saying by supporting his premise. So check it out.
Hold on, let's stop, because you're being really careful, and I'm catching all your qualifications. So if you're listening, slow your roll, because you need to, like, he's being very careful in all how he's qualifying each of the claims. As you know, historical claims are tendentious, to say the least. And any history that attempts to tell the story by gathering information from as many people involved as possible is going to be more complicated than a top-down telling. And so I wanted to note that is like what a particular interest. And let me just point one thing out. A particular interest is this notion that what was happening on this East Coast. Okay, this is all framed by this idea, like a silly idea, even like who has proprietorship over this culture or some shit. Like who can say it's ours and it's not yours or whatever.
Well, Black Americans can say that because we did create the culture, so we could definitely claim it. I don't know where you're going with that.
So insofar as that's a operating framework, what happened on the East Coast that made its way to the West Coast had to integrate into the elements that were already happening, whose form was strikingly similar, and maybe even similar enough, I would probably argue, to say it was kind of the same shit happening all along. But whose form was strikingly similar, and maybe even similar enough, I would probably argue, to say it was kind of the same shit happening all along. But it wasn't as if it was a straight mapping onto an empty canvas in LA who was empty of any street culture or music culture or dance culture or culture.
Well, show us evidence that there was a music culture like that of Black Americans from the East Coast that was somewhat identical. See, this is what I call revisionist history. Trying to make up something. There's no way that Mexicans had a similar street culture like Black Americans did. Let's go.
Yeah, most definitely there's adaptation happening. And so part of what this project is about is, I'm asking the question, one of the underlying questions I have in this other project is, did Latinos have any role in this process of adaptation in which East Coast hip hop, New York City, Bronx hip hop is being adapted to the West Coast context? Did Latinos have any hand in that experience, in that process? And I would argue, yes, they did. Now, again, I'm very careful because, as I said earlier, this is an Afro-diasporic culture. It emerged.
Okay. Let me correct the good doctor. It's not an African diaspora culture. There's only one ethnic group that created hip hop. It wasn't Africans. It wasn't Jamaicans. It wasn't Caribbeans. It wasn't anybody outside of African American culture. So he's wrong about that. And sometimes, some of these Latinos have a hard time admitting that it's us. So they'll spread it, they'll spread it all over the diaspora in order to not single us out, who are the rightful creators of the culture.
Emerges from a confluence of Afro-diasporic cultural movements. And some Latinos are part of that Afro-diasporic confluence, meaning that some Latinos are of African descent. And one of the interesting things is, yes, even on the West Coast, you have some Afro-Latinos that are present and in the mix. And so that's something I want to highlight. But you have a mix. I was saying, you had some that were more, kind of mestizo. You had Chicanos. You have folks from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, that are part of this early scene, and they're the minority. They're in the minority, I would say, but they're active and they're doing something. So I want to highlight some of these stories. That's one of the things that I want to do, and I also want to, just like in my book, that
let me stop it right there. So he's playing the African card. Let's include all the so-called people of the African diaspora. And so, Cologne did that when he was dealing with Charlie Rock. And this is where they go to when they want to try to crowbar their way into the culture. They'll bring up the African diaspora where they can include Latinos in the group. Let's go.
I have already, where I talk about ethnic and racial identities. I want to talk about hip hop as a space of ethnic and racial identity formation. Like what was happening during that early period where you have Latinos active in a predominantly Black cultural movement. What sort of ethnic and racial negotiations are going on there?
Absolutely no negotiations, no adaptations on the behalf of Black Americans, because we create the culture. You are the ones, the Latinos and these other racial groups and ethnic groups are the ones doing the adaptation, not Black Americans. There is no negotiation. We set the standards, our culture. So you either ride with it or you don't.
So that's what I'm asking.
And your field of study is not without controversy.
Well, definitely it's controversial because I definitely have a problem with it. Let me switch gears, man. Let me deal with this YouTuber who takes a certain slightly different take on it. He still believes that Mexicans are a part of the creation, but his thing is that he believes this is because of indigenous blood, not African blood. All right. Now I don't have a picture of this YouTuber, but this is his channel right here. He's a Mexican American, and let me tell you something. If you didn't know it by the way he talks, you would swear he's possibly Black. So this is what happens. These Mexicans, these minorities, they're so in love with our culture. They take things from our culture, they embrace it, but then they'll deny that it comes from us. This guy is using the N-word, not in this particular audio, but I peeped out a couple of his videos. He used the N-word like Fat Joe would use the N-word. And so he don't use essay. He used all the words brothers would use. Is amazing. And so what's interesting about his take, let me try to set up basically what he's talking about. He's saying he's of the opinion, and this was done about a year ago. So he's of the opinion that Puerto Ricans are creators of hip hop along with Black Americans. So he's saying because of that indigenous blood that's part of Puerto Rican culture or Puerto Rican people, he believes that extends to all Latinos, including Mexicans. So in other words, if Puerto Ricans are the creators of hip hop and we give Puerto Ricans credit for that, then that should extend to all Mexicans. You see the dumb, illogical way of thinking that this guy is engaged in, because you tend to get there when you're trying to rationalize your reason for crowbarring your way into the culture. There's no logical reason to make that connection, but he makes that connection. And then he argues that, well, if you include all Black Americans as part of the creation, then you should include all Latinos. But he doesn't understand that all Black Americans are part of a singular ethnic group, right? Now, if he said we can't include all Africans, Jamaicans, or Barbadians, Trinidadians, or whatever, then I get that. You shouldn't include them because they're not part of the creation. But you cannot exclude all Black Americans just because they don't live in New York. That's his thing. He's saying it would be unfair to separate Black Americans because they live outside of New York. So therefore, it's unfair to separate Puerto Ricans from Mexicans and other Latino groups. You see how illogical that is? So what I'm going to do, let me play that particular audio and you judge for yourself.
What's going on YouTube? Before we go any further, you already know what to do, man. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, super salute you. You're a real one, for real, for real. If you ain't subscribed yet, man, what you waiting on? Don't be a player hater, man. Hit that subscribe button. Let's go. What's happening, YouTube? We're gonna get into this discussion, this debate, this conversation about hip hop, about rap, and it's gonna be more in particular, more specifically on Latinos in hip hop and Latinos being guests in hip hop. Let's get into this debate, man. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let's go. Latinos are guests in hip hop. That's what I read. Well, and more specifically, it said Mexicans. That's what the wording was. Not Latinos. I take that back. It was Mexicans are guests in hip hop. But Puerto Ricans aren't. Because the question was asked, are Latinos guests in hip hop if Puerto Ricans were part of the creating of hip hop? And numerous comments and things that I read said that blacks are the creators of hip hop along with Puerto Ricans, but they're the only Latinos that count as the creators. No other Latinos. Any other Latinos are guests, including Mexicans. So that that got my attention for the reason being the separation of Latinos. Like, how could you separate Latinos? We're all indigenous. We're all the same. We're all in this together. You know what I'm saying? That's like me saying, if you're black, you're a guest in hip hop if you're not from New York. Because the only blacks that are the creators of hip hop are the ones from New York. And that's like me separating blacks, right? Separating the African American community and saying, oh, if you're from down south or the Midwest, or if you're black just in general and not from New York, then you're a guest in hip hop just like the rest of us, right? That's dumb as hell, right? That's ignorant. No one would say that. Why would you separate the African American community like that? It's all one community. That's the same way we feel about Latinos. For someone to out the rest of the Latinos, you feel me? You get what I'm saying? Because we're all indigenous, bro. Puerto Ricans have indigenous blood just like the rest of us. And with the Mayans and the Aztecs, and they're just tribes, bro. There's even numerous tribes within the Aztec Empire. You know what I'm saying? We're all indigenous, bro. The only difference is the tribes and the location of those tribes. The Mayans, the Aztec Empire, the Navajos, the Cherokees, the Apaches, the tribes on the Puerto Rican islands. We're all indigenous, bro. We're just motherfuckers. Just some decide to travel further down to the Americas and landed in those areas. That became the Mayans. Some stayed in where we know now as the United States. That became Navajo, Cherokee. Some traveled, like, you feel me? We're all tribes from the same indigenous, bro. The way you can look at it as gangs. We put in gang terms for y'all. So I know I got a lot of gang members in here. Shout out to the gang members, you know what I'm saying? Shout out to the thugs that subscribe and watching this video. So let me put in gang terms. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can look at it as like we're all homies, you know what I'm saying, but from different gangs. This dude might be from East Side, this dude might be from South Side, he might be from West Side or North Side. At the end of the day, we're all homies. You know what I'm saying? We're all homies. We just from different gangs, different hoods. You know what I'm saying? But we're all homies. That's the way you can look at Latinos. You know what I'm saying? Same, we're all indigenous, just different tribes, different locations. You feel me? So for someone to separate Latinos like that, I mean, I get it. They probably don't view it the same way I do, which is cool. You know what I'm saying? That's why I'm here to educate y'all. You feel me?
Well, let me educate you, brother. Let me educate you. Black Americans aren't defined by a region, all right? If you know anything about the history of Black Americans, most of us were in the South due to slavery. After the Emancipation Proclamation and the Great Migration, we started to spread out. And for the most part, we had similar cultures. That's why if I could go to a Baptist church on the East Coast, I can almost guarantee if I go to one on the West Coast, they're going to have similar music, similar order of services, similar preaching, because it comes from the same culture. The same thing with food. If I eat dinner on the West Coast, it's going to be the same or mostly the same as it would be on the East Coast, because we have a similar shared culture. So, and let's look at the music. The music that went into the creating of hip hop culture in New York, 99% of it didn't come from New York. It came from outside of New York. And so that's part of Black American culture as well. So we're not defined by a region. Now you're trying to lump Latinos as one group when all Latinos for the most part are genetically different, culturally, your ethnicities are different. There is no relationship to one Latino that lives in Puerto Rico, one that lives in Mexico, one that lives in Chile. There's no relationship. Even if you want to say you have a shared ancestry, but there are subdivisions of that ancestry that makes you different. So you got to go into the science. You can't make these claims and not understand the science. Common sense tell you you're not the same people. Even Mexicans discriminate against the native people inside Mexico. So if you consider yourself one people, why are you discriminating against the true natives? I'm talking about the Mexicans who have this 65% European ancestry, the mestizos, those individuals. They discriminate against the real natives of Mexico. So how in the hell are you going to say that somehow you are related to Puerto Ricans? It's a dumb argument, but this is what tethers do. They try to make up some rationale as to try to suggest that they are, creators in the culture of hip hop. Everyone is a guest except Black Americans. That includes Africans, Jamaicans, Trinidadians, Barbadians, Cuban, Puerto Rican, all Mexicans, all are guests. And that's the real deal, and that's without question. All right. So let me end this video. Check this out. If you guys have any videos of any other tethers making outlandish claims, you think, you want to hear me deal with that, please send it to me through my email. If you don't have it, as I usually post it in the comments on my videos, but if you don't see it, hit me up in the comments. I'll send you the email and then you could get it to me. Okay, if this is the first time you're on this channel, welcome. Listen, before you leave this video, or even after you leave the video, hit that like button and subscribe. I got a lot of things on the horizon. I would love for you guys to take this ride with me. All right, until the next time, peace.